All right, thanks a lot. And again, very sorry not to be there with you. It would have been nice to meet you in person, David and Christian, and to meet Richard again. We met in at the LSE a long time ago, and in Bordeaux, I think, in Marseille, about 10 years ago, more or less. And thanks for the seminar invitation, which turned out to be a webinar. And that's work with two of my PhD students, Maël and Niklas. So I'm going to talk about trust and hope. I'm sure some of you know probably more than we do about some of these concepts. And there's a quote. I don't know if it's made up or if someone really. I mean, someone invented that one day, but I don't know exactly where it's coming from. It says trust takes years to build, seconds to break, and forever to repair. So it's a bit the underlying thought here because there's a huge literature on trust, showing out how long it takes to build trust, and a lot of the literature is actually on the long trends in how trust varies with trade or growth and both. I mean, both way in terms of causality. There's a lot of trust impacting these outcomes, as I mentioned here, and a lot of it has to do with also political participation, compliance, effectiveness of policies, and a lot on the other direction on the determinant of trust is really a long-term view. The role of past crises, the role of history, the role of past pandemics, climate change, etc., etc. I mentioned that there's a huge literature that you know, and I mentioned some of the surveys as well here, or broad perspective like the paper of Tabellini, for instance. But in the short run, yeah, trust may take a few seconds to be destroyed. Maybe not, but maybe part of trust may take only a little while to be damaged somehow, or through short-term variation that might be repeated, as just like the media are doing, bombarding us with bad news, threats, and other sense of increased risk. So the question here is, can we shock trust in the short run with some kind of replication of what the media are doing to us? It's not exactly the media, but a broader capture, rendering of this type of threat, as we're going to see. And we were asking the same question for hope, even though hope is studied for a long time as a concept in philosophy and other domains, but for economics, I know mainly the work of Carol Graham, whom you know well, I'm sure, and we had many exchanges with Carol about this paper. And hope is an interesting thing. It's multidimensional in a way, but it's important again both direction. Hope can impact on or be associated with many important aspects, like social cohesion, and I put it a bit below in the slides with social unrest, populism, etc. And again with non-compliance or adherence to policies, and where it's coming from, the determinants, or what is hope? It's a deep question. Just to make the parallel, we could say hope is a sense of trust in the future, just to make a parallel to trust in others, trust in institutions, etc. But hope is more than this. Hope also contains a sense of agency and links to social connectedness and social elements. So the work of Carol and others has been also to look at the longer trends, or at least the rooted parts of hope, and in particular the heterogeneity across cultures. But again, we are bringing the question to the short term and asking whether hope is, or how fragile hope is in the short run. So again, about the malleability of these two social constructs, We can call them social constructs. We can call them in different ways. Trust and hope, some people call them emotions or some kind of secondary emotion. And we're going to see a bit the link with primary emotions. Um, and of course, that's the first question before asking how can we restore trust and hope. And a lot of the experiments that I mentioned here in the first paragraph of this slide is has to do with this kind of strategies to try to restore trust or hope. And hope more recently, there's a literature, especially in development economics, on aspirational programs. One by a colleague of mine from Bordeaux, Tanguy Bernard, was this video intervention with role model um, um, uh, in order to restore people's aspiration and incentives to get some education, to start businesses in poor area, etc., etc. Um, Many natural experiments have been done to evaluate how trusts can be altered in the, as I mentioned before, in the middle or long run, in particular in response to shocks and some form of threats, whether it's environmental threats, health threats like pandemics, and so recent COVID paper, but not only. Social threats or conflicts, terror, economic threats, etc. But again, these are so we have a full survey in the paper looking at some form of natural experiments. But in terms of pure experiments, there's a limited literature. Again, I mean, there's a lot of literature on trust games and in behavioral economics, but very few things related to experiments looking at activation of threats and feeling of threats. Among the few exceptions, it's two COVID paper that I mentioned at the bottom of the slide here on reactivation or framing of health or economic threats during the pandemic. So here we are going to look at some experiment to assess how the perception of threats may alter trust and hope by reactivating some form of everyday threats as the ones appearing on social media or in the news. And we are going to vary the type of risks underlying these threats, whether it's going to be terrorism, war, or climate. And we're going to measure trust in others. So I'm going to focus on trust in others and hope. We also look at trust in institutions, but the period was a bit special, as I will explain, and maybe trust in institution is a bit um, uh, fragile, or the way we measure it might be a bit questionable given the circumstances. And we measure threat, how people feel threatened, and we measure potential mediators. I shouldn't call it like this. It's some association with emotions, but a lot of things can be activated at the same time, emotion as well, and it doesn't mean they are mediators, but they are at least correlates. So what we do is extremely simple. I'm not going to show you the video, but I'll show you some snapshots of the video. We are showing people some very short videos, 3-4 minutes. One is a placebo video, a control group showing picture, I mean, like some nature, forest, valleys, and something quite relaxing and calm, hopefully neutral. And the three other videos are the treatment videos, one showing some images of natural disasters. So we are focusing on, we have a sample of French people. So we try to put some images that relates to events that we had, flooding, the forest fire in the lands south of Bordeaux a couple of years ago, etc., etc. Same for terrorism. So we have picture of the Bataclan terrorist attacks 10 years ago and but also more general terror pictures. And for war, older picture, but also more recent views on the war in Ukraine that's getting closer and etc. So that's a kind of it's an online experiment with quite a large sample, and the groups that are treated that show that watch these threat videos are random, and we also stratify along four margins: gender, age, socioeconomic category, and region. So there are a few papers using videos, either for intervention, as I mentioned before, or also for threats. Some related things we've done with the psychologists in Bordeaux on pandemic-related threats. And there's a paper on financial market where they look at how risk aversion varies, and they use frightening videos like horror movie that in Guizot et al. Other papers on using emotion as outcome, so fear and anger, and another one on time perception. So either some emotion or deep parameters like risk and time preferences. So we did the experiment in at the end of June last year, which was a bit of a special time. So you might say we lack external validity, or it's interesting per se, but it was the week just before the election for the parliament in France. This unexpected elections that actually at the time were supposed to lead the far right party to power in France. So it was a very tense week, highly charged politically, socially, and a moment where you can have an additional spark, an additional, if in this kind of context you have an additional event like a terrorist attack, or does it make it even more sensitive for the way people would respond to that situation in terms of first of all, in terms of hope and trust, but then in civic behavior, potentially also in electoral attitudes and vote. But not to be only in this kind of special context, we have, for one of the outcomes, for the terror video, we have replicated the experiment 1 year later, which was last summer, almost exactly 1 year later, which is which was a calmer period, even though not much more stable politically in France, but at that time a little bit, at least we had a government for some months. So we were waiting until the time we had a government to be able to redo the experiment. So we have a bit less than 3,000 people. It's quite balanced between the three or the four groups, the three treated groups and the placebo group. We measure trust and hope and emotions using several questions, and take the average in order to reduce noise in the way we measure these concepts. And we discard a few, a few weird answers, but there were not that many. I mean, overall, it's. So the first thing to do as a randomized control trial validation is to check internal validity by looking at whether the four groups are similar in terms of composition, or the more so as they have been stratified along these different margins, as I mentioned. So what we do, we have a quite, so we can regress treatment on these four margins, so gender, age, or social professional categories or region. We did that, and these four characteristics don't come out significantly, but we can do it even a bit in a more demanding way by creating cells that combine gender, age, social professional categories, and region. So we do that step by step here, but the last row in the table is when you have these cells that really characterize whether you're a man, age like 18, 25, living in Paris, and working in academia, for instance. And when you put all these cells and you have a F-test of significance of all these cells, then the p-values are here, and it's never significant. So our four groups are statistically similar. to start with. So that's a good news. And another check we do is to check if the treatment is effective in the sense in that are people do people feel threatened? So to do that, we have a question that is to what extent would you say that you feel threatened? And a second question, to what extent would you say that you feel in danger? And we take the average of these two questions. And that's a measure of the feeling of threat. And you see in blue, that's the control group. Those who see this nice video of a landscape and more neutral video, and the gray is the three treated groups. And people in treated groups are significantly more threatened and show like higher score of or higher level of threat in the response. And almost none of them in the gray group, in the treated groups, are at level 0, which is category 1 on the threat score here.
There's a lot of people, even like category 7, right? Very threatened, even in the control group, like almost 18%, 15%. What do you think
Yes.
the case? Is it sort of like this background threat generally, or?
Yes, exactly. It's like I always talk about my mom when I describe this because she's always threatened about everything, even without watching horror movie. So probably she shouldn't watch horror movies. So some people feel threatened uh, continuously at any point in time. So I guess that's this type of people. You also have people who don't feel threatened after the video, a few, not, I said there's almost none, but there are a few, and we are going to see an alternative treatment of these people in sensitivity tests in a few minutes. So for trust, so the first type of result is for trust in others. So social trust, again, is the mean of two different questions, whether people can be trusted and whether people, or if most people try to take advantage of others. So that the second one is the negative one. So we revert the scale in order to have it, to make it comparable to the first question. And that gives us a social trust score. And as you see here, it's the treatment. The first column is for any video, whether it's the environmental shock, the terror shock, or the war shock. And then we look specifically at each of the treatment. And in all cases, you have a significant effect that in the magnitude is given by the second and third row here, where you have the effect relative to the mean. So of the control group and relative to the standard deviation. So it's about a magnitude of around 13 to 23% of the standard deviation. The lowest being for the climate shock and the largest for the war threats. But the three treatments are not significantly different in them. So it's not some might say it's not a huge effect, but you don't expect a massive effect, but it's also not a negligible effect. It's still a sizable effect. And to be convinced, yes.
Okay, that's just on your last slide. I'm quite curious as to why you see such a large effect, because I can see why terrorism and war, the message of those videos is very antithetical to trust. But why for natural disasters? I mean, I don't see inherent. I don't know exactly what was in those videos, but I don't see inherently what a natural disaster. I mean, sometimes they can even bring people together. What about a natural disaster would undermine people's trust in society? And if there's nothing in the videos that would suggest that, I mean, how are you then interpreting this result as a sort of emotional reaction rather than something more?
Yeah, I mean, it could be a threat per se, like a feeling. That's why emotions are going to be important, even though we are not able to really differentiate the role. I mean, we are only partly able to differentiate the role of emotion, but if a feeling of threat and fear makes you afraid of the world and others, whatever the nature of the threat, you might experience that. Then you may say you see video in the video you see people alone on the roof of their house when there's a massive flooding and nobody comes to help them, or the government is not there to help them, the rescue comes too late, this kind of thing. So for trust in others or trust in institutions, there, you might reach that kind of thought, but that's in the it's not totally clear what are the mechanisms. It's true that you may expect it. I mean, that's what we see. We see the effect for war is much larger.
Yeah.
And but there is still an effect for the climate shock.
And how were the videos selected? Were they selected based on a sort of antitrust message, or was this a kind of a sample of just videos about like
we try to make the video comprehensive in order to reach people quite broadly. So we have there were images of different type of climate shock in the case of this video, and relatively recent in order to to make it more effective. So we asked a professional communication person, specialist, a lady who was a friend of one of the PhD students, and so she's working in that field, and she designed this video in order to make them relatively broad. So we don't really select one particular event or and it's the same for the other two.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So it was a choice for the design. In that sense, we followed what our colleagues in Bordeaux were doing in psychology when we were using this kind of videos. But of course, many alternative designs are possible. So just to talk about the magnitude here, we extracted from our literature review all the all the surveys looking at trust in others, and some are trust in governments, and that's all the negative effects. A few report positive effects. That could be something like rely around the flag type of effect, or other things. But most of the studies report negative effect of threats. So some are surveys, so just correlation. Some are experiments. Some are quasi-experiment. Most are medium or long term, as I was saying before. You see you only have 3 or 4. Including hours here, which are short term. And you see, I mean, the magnitudes are, so we are somehow, that's the magnitude of, sorry, we're here, relative to the mean, because we couldn't find relative to the standard deviation of the outcome of trust for all the studies, but we could find the relative effects relative to the mean. So sometimes it's very large, much larger, but not always, and it's not always significant. AXA was one of the paper on COVID, I think. So we are someone in the middle, and showing that our effect is not particularly small compared to a literature that look mainly at longer term determinants. Now, sensitivity analysis here are with these people that you were talking about, the one at 7, but I was mentioning also the one those at 1. And those that are 1 are somehow call them non-compliers, because they don't. So the people in gray here, the few that don't feel threatened, they are the first level of threat, despite the fact that they watch one of the 3 treatment videos, the 3 threatening videos. So we can either discard these people completely in the first row here, or we assume that you are treated only if you watch the video and you somehow experience a threat feeling larger than 1. So it's like putting them back in the control group. and that it doesn't change the result that much. There are not very, there are only a few of these people anyway. The last row is when you use the threats as a continuous variable, but the interpretation is going to be a bit different. So now an interesting thing is that could also be related to the mechanism, and maybe we have to dig deeper and trying to understand what you mentioned, for instance, for climate, the climate threat. So one way to try to understand what's going on is to look at heterogeneous response, and an interesting dimension is political orientation. Most of the effect comes from center and right-wing people. If we look first, before looking at the response, if we look just at the heterogeneity in terms of trust, in social trust, the people on the right side of the political spectrum tend to have lower trust in others. The extreme lefts tend to have higher trust in others, but lower trust in governments. The right has lower trust in everything, basically. And that's what Yann Algan is showing in different papers. So what we show here is that there's an amplification of these trends. The right is not only displaying more distrust, but also respond more negatively in terms of their trust in others to the feeling of threat. Okay, and the left, it's interesting for some of the events, and in particular the climate threat, you almost have a significant effect, but positive. You see, so that would be more like some kind of solidarity feeling, and so. So, the picture is more complex, but that's part of your question on, what's going on with the climate threat, and you have some kind of heterogeneity, which is interesting. The left people would tend to respond positively and show some form of solidarity, facing some kind of more neutral, kind of human-less type of threat, which is nature. Even though you might think flooding is caused because the government didn't do the right thing, or or same for forest fire or whatever, but it's still less human-driven than in the short run, at least in terms of perception, than terror and war, where it's impersonificated with the face of terrorists or dictators, etc., etc. Another interesting thing is social media. The response in terms of trust in others is larger for those who never use social media, so are a bit more maybe isolated or wise, running away from Twitter and Facebook, or those who use it a lot. And those who use it a lot may actually experience something that's called doom scrolling, that using social media to actually consume more and more emotional events, more to get a thrill, and probably to somehow reactivate the feeling of threat. So there will be some kind of cumulative effect or amplification effect for these doom scrollers among the frequent user of social media.
Okay.
Yes,
Just interrupt. Sorry to interrupt, rather.
no problem.
To interpret the y-axis correctly, do you understand that this is a between estimation? So it's the difference between treatment and control. It's not within.
Yes.
So you don't have a baseline and an endline measure of trust.
No, we don't have a panel. We would like to have a panel. The beauty of the interdisciplinary program, like the one I'm leading in Bordeaux. The name of it, actually, the acronym is HOPE, but it was nothing to do with that particular paper. But in this program, we work a lot with the psychologists, and they do things quite differently from us. And in particular, they were very reluctant to have a panel. So we thought we might do it anyway, but they are more cautious or more concerned by the fact that if you have a panel, people would simply be different and respond differently because they were interviewed a few weeks before and being asked the same kind of question. But we would like to have, ideally, we wanted to have to interview people and have some kind of base, a measure of their kind of natural level of emotions, of trust, of hope, and threats, as we discussed before, people who are always threatened by everything, etc. And I think there's a technique called the Solomon approach, where you can actually test if the panel is neutral or is innocuous or not. Where so maybe in the future, if we have the money and the time, we do this more complex design where we would have a panel and test if the panel has an impact per se or if the panel can be used without any problem.
Thanks.
In terms of looking at a specific period of time, I mean, a lot of economists would say, yeah, your stuff is too special because that was just before Marine Le Pen was about to become not president, but at least our group would become the leading force in the parliament, and yeah, she would have become prime minister. As a result of that, that did not happen. So we did the same experiment 1 year later when we had a government and we changed many times after that, but around that time in July 2020, well, 25 this year, that was at least a bit more, slightly more stable. But the war was not stable, so you know, you might still say it's still a special time. It's not a normal time. Well, we should have done things many years ago because I don't think there's any normal time anymore. There's always some shock of any and background threat of any sort, whether it's geopolitics or pandemics or whatever. So, you know, it's not clear what external validity check should be in a parallel universe where things are calm, but we don't have the chance to live in this universe anymore. So, so that's some kind of external validity where we see that 1 year later we have very similar effects for trust in others, as you see here. And when you pull the two coefficient, the year does not matter, but so that's a very similar type of effects for trust. Even though the trust in others, I don't know what's the trends might decrease, but trust in politicians and trust in institution has declined slowly but surely over a longer period of time. But the recent episode in this crazy country has not helped, and certainly the trust in institutions and politicians have declined even more over the past years. That's why we don't use it here, because it's really it's not clear how to interpret that. So let's move to hope. Hope is I think it's a great concept, and I read the work of Carol with a lot of interest, and hope is I get back to emotion, but directly here looking at the results, you have a quite strong coefficient, and again it's large for any type of intervention here, and it's between 15 and 20% of standard deviation. So in that sense, in relative term, it's not so different from trust. I should have said it's based on two questions. Hope as some more like hope in the future and optimism about the future. And hope is described by Snyder, was the psychologist, who's one of the big name I think for the literature on hope, as a positive motivational state involving a sense of agency. So we have an additional question, more related to like locus of control, and it goes like this: if you have a certain sense of control on your destiny. So if we add this third question to an average with the two others to get our hope measure, but really adding this element of control, of agency, the results are similar. They are even slightly larger, from 20 up to 25% of the standard deviation. And it's interesting that the sense of control might be even more volatile than the rest, than optimism. Okay, that connects to a lot of other literature that you may know well on locus of control in economics. For hope, we have a bit of heterogeneity. Again, we have the same type of heterogeneity according to political views, with most of the effects coming from the right, but also the center. The center was somehow partly not always significant for trust, but that's a similar idea. And then we jump to other outcomes that could be seen as mediator, or at least interesting correlates. It's a very complex domain, I think, and it's very hard to know what's going on. I'll mention at the end some kind of more complex experiment that one might do. But what you see here is the blue is the control group, and green is the climate threat, yellow the terror threat, and pink the war threat. And you have threats as a measure at the end on the right here, but then you have all the other emotion, negative or positive emotion, and you see that they all react. So basically our treatment might not be very subtle. It's some kind of fuzzy threat that, and all of them, the three type of threats, they are so, broad type of threat that they really affect people in many dimensions, but also emotions are related. So psychologists, talking with the psychologist colleagues, I realized that it's very hard to measure emotions. People sometimes get confused, are not really able to isolate different emotions when you ask them about how they feel. Some emotions like anger and fear are very much intertwined, very much related to each other. So it's quite difficult. So basically, people respond in all these dimensions. And you might think that trust and hope are some form of higher order emotional construct that also involve cognition, some form of anticipation, goal-oriented reasoning, and that they would respond in a specific way, not exactly in the way this basic emotion respond, but as we can see here, the basic emotion are also playing a role, and there might be an emotional part to trust and hope that we kind of capture in what we do. I'll skip this; it's a bit long, but we refer to a few papers looking at emotion and trust. We could find only 3 papers: one in psychology, one in political science, and one in probably I forgot. And there's a lot of neuroscience literature on this. So what we do here, you can look at we take one emotion at a time. We look at anger. So in the control group, trust in others and anger are negatively correlated, and significantly so. And so just in the cross section, the angry people are trust others less. And then when you move to the treated group, whatever the treatment, this correlation is becoming more negative. So we have some kind of co-movement that is captured here. And that's similar when you do use other emotion, even though I'll get back to that, but it's complex to look at all emotion at once, given that they're correlated. But that's interesting to see that is the co-movement. There is some kind of co-movement because the negative correlation between this emotion and trust is more pronounced after the threat. So people who feel threatened would also are those who respond emotionally to the threats. And we try here with different emotions, and what you see in the first column is like anger is not significant anymore in the control group because it's also correlated with fear and with disgust. We have also more complete, comprehensive characterization with the positive emotions, but here we focus on the three main negative emotions. And again, what you see here is that when you move from column 1 to the groups, the treated groups, and especially the people who are subject to the terror threat and war threat, you see again that even when some emotion were not significant anymore, like anger, they become very significant. At least anger and fear are becoming very significant. Again, showing some kind of co-movement, and those who respond to, who feel threatened, are also experiencing more, possibly more anger or more fear. Or they were also already the people with higher level of anger and fear, but they experience an increase in this intensity of emotion. We cannot really differentiate the extensive and the intensive margin here. But disgust goes the other way around. You have a kind of decoupling of this emotion after the threat. Okay, so that's the emotional pattern. It's not. It's more nuanced. It's a bit more complex, but somehow it might make sense.
Olivier, for anger, I think we had this actually in the emotions lecture, has the tendency in the appraisal tendency framework to blame other people.
Yes.
So that's also like David's question. So why would this actually incidentally have then an effect on trust? But because the feeling of anger, you know, simply has this motivational property of blaming others, and it might be simply dominating fear channel, but it's stronger in terms of coefficient for terrorism and war. So maybe it's just the dominant emotion that's being felt, and hence that's why you have this effect on trust.
It could be, and but again, I mean, it's indeed it's related to the point about the climate shock before, because you see that the co-movement is strong for terror and war, and these are the threat where you have people to blame, because you see the face of terrorists or the face of Putin, other dictator in these videos. So you know you really have human to blame in here. I don't know if that's consistent with your question, but
It is, yes. I think it makes sense. I mean, for environment, not so much, I guess, but for terrorism and war, definitely would have I would think that theoretically it makes sense. Yeah.
That's the way we try to describe things, but maybe we should say it up front in the paper when we see that the effect on environment is slightly smaller at the beginning. For hope, there's an interesting thing when you bring emotion into the picture, is that because the ancient philosopher used to describe hope as an emotion, which is kind of the opposite of fear for them, both in antique philosopher and philosopher during Enlightenment, and so hope alongside fear have both being the opposite response to situation of uncertainty. And what we see is that when we add emotions in the regression for hope, the R square is increasing by 56%. Well, it increased only by 6% when we add emotion in the regression for trust. So indeed, hope as a baseline, like the baseline cross-sectional level of hope, are very much related to emotion, and that's quite interesting. Maybe we should dig and look at the correlation with the components of hope, as we have these three different measures: hope in the future, optimism, and some form of control, question on control. And what we do here is just the same kind of co-movement checks, and we see that again, that anger and especially fear, and maybe the ancient philosopher were right, especially fear is showing some co-movement with hope as a response to threats. I should say very quickly, because probably we're about to end, the D parameters, risk aversion and time preference, are not affected, because that would be some kind of interest mechanism, especially when we talk about control and so on. But we don't see any effect of the threat on risk aversion and time preferences. And for trust in institution, it's null on average. There's a negative effect for some subgroups, and there's a positive effect once you control for emotion, as if emotion were destroying trust in institution, like negative emotions, but somehow there would be a parallel channel through which people would show some form of solidarity with the leader and so on. That's the rally around the flag literature. But that's certainly over-interpreting a very short type experiment like this one here. So I should conclude. We show that trust and hope can be shot quite much with simple video. Admittedly, I have to say it's a paper which is very hard to publish. We had a few rejections already, and the critique that we have is a bit always the same. That's a short-term effect, and we know it's a short-term effect. We could have had a panel to have a baseline in terms of measuring people's emotion and do some kind of difference with the experiment, but measuring their level of trust before. We could also have a panel to look at what happened afterwards, some weeks later, but I'm pretty convinced there's no effects. This effect is probably very short-lived, and it's normal. I mean, it's only a few minutes video. So we have to live with this. And I think it's still interesting per se to show that trust and hope are objects that you can manipulate quite substantially with simple video. And I think that's the main result of that. But a lot of people are not happy with that, and we'd like to see if we are able to shock people forever. I don't know. Then I don't think we would pass the ethical committee if we were able to do that. But that's we actually did pass the ethical committee that we have in Bordeaux now, the level of the university. And we try to defend ourselves by saying that short term is still fine because we show that there is an emotional maybe dimension to this two social construct, and they are not perfectly stable. Part of it varies, fluctuates. With a magnitude that is actually not small and comparable to real-world shocks. Also that even if it's short-term, that's reactivating what's going on every day with the threat that people see in the media, in social media, and there might be a cumulative effect that, of course, will be even harder to measure, but would be interesting to study. And a third argument is to say, even if it's short-lived, it could actually happen at a critical time, like during this election time or at some other critical moments in our life, where a change in trust at that particular moment might be very critical, very instrumental but in a negative way. And the emotional interpretation is very preliminary. We just try to show this co-movement, and with panel data, we might be able to compare if we had a baseline to measure people's natural level of trust, emotion, and hope. We might see who reacts and along which margin. That's one of the things we could do. Another thing is if emotion is a mediator. If the primary emotion were mediators, we would need to isolate their causal mediating effect. We would need to randomly manipulate emotion at the same time as we manipulate the threat, which is often called as some form of encouragement design. And that's very hard. We are thinking of trying to somehow neutralize emotion ex ante by saying, oh, you're gonna see threatening video, but don't get angry or don't get afraid, but then you reduce the threat at the same time. So it's very hard to manipulate the threat and some of the emotion at the same time, and the two things randomly and in a differentiated way. So so far we haven't thought we have not been able to find a proper design to do that, and we hope our psychologist colleagues will help us on that, because we are more in the field of psychology there than our field. Thank you very much for your attention in this.
Any question?
Mark, is that?
No, I think you can hear if you just speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much for your presentation.
I was wondering, to what extent do you think the paper is framed around the negative effects of the 3 videos on war, climate change, etc.? To what extent do you think having an active control of this positive experience of watching a nature video is a sort of positive treatment? And considering this, whether one way to strengthen the robustness is to replicate the experiment but have just a passive control. And that would also give you a baseline of threat. You know, people's latent sense of anger and threat, and you'd imagine that that's going to be somewhere in the middle of the nature video and the threatening videos.
Okay, I could hear. At first, I thought I could hear you, but I missed a few things.
I can come closer if you like.
No, yeah, if you could, but also if you could clarify what you mean by active control and passive control, because
Okay, so what I was saying was, yeah, you framed it around the negative reception to the videos about war and climate change. But to what extent could the control video actually be a positive experience which reduces sense of anger? And
okay.
and one way to test this would be to have a control group who don't watch any video. And that could also give you a baseline level of the sort of latent fear among the sample. So that would be one way to, I think, to get both of those issues.
Okay. Yeah, totally misunderstood. Okay, now it's clear.
Yeah. What do you think?
That's very interesting, because we found out that among people in the control group, those who have randomized the order of the blocks of questions, and for those who, because we thought if you ask about emotion, you actually, at least the psychologist told us that if you ask someone about emotions, you might somehow, reduce the emotion. So if someone is very upset and you say, "Are you angry?" and without H, sorry for my pronunciation, "Are you angry?" Then the person might calm down, and his anger will go down, will stop, or at least will be reduced. So if it's the case, then we wanted to check that. So the timing of the trust question compared to the moment we asked the emotion questions. And we ask a few other things also on political orientation and so on. And in a control group, it turns out that the people who are asked this kind of questions, so more on politics and so on, not so much about their emotion, were getting upset because we ask this kind of questions. So the control group is a composite, is a mix of people who are asked about trust and hope just after watching the video. But it's a kind of ideal world where you are in a bubble, where you have this nice picture of the countryside. But life is not like that. Maybe you're calm, but you receive some kind of aggression, someone asking you this kind of thing. So who are you gonna vote for at the next election? So, don't ask me this. I don't want to talk about politicians. So we don't know exactly what to do with this composite group, but it's exactly what you're saying. It's like the control group is heterogeneous, and some of these people are somehow treated by the fact that they are asked certain type of questions before being asked about trust and hope. So another control group, what you call a passive control group, could be there, which is like just a questionnaire without anything at all. But we believe that the control group, as we have it, because we ask, we randomize, and so we can look at the different subgroups, and somehow it's closer to the real life. Those who are asked about trust and hope just after the nice video are somehow for a few minutes in a yoga lesson or in some kind of meditation thing and out of the world, and it's not really the real world. So maybe the real control group is this mix. But one way to check that is to do exactly what you say.
Cool. Thanks.
George? I guess so. Yeah. We usually have a closer hit, but Richard wants to have this.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I agree with Will. You know, my research says that people are more happy and more relaxed in natural environments, and so that control feels a bit like a positive influence. But the other thing that struck me is you're looking at kind of emotions and emotions that I guess could be sort of moral emotions about a sort of a moral principle being violated, anger and disgust and so on, I guess particularly around terrorism and war. And I thought it was also interesting, you didn't, I think, disaggregate those emotions by people's political view, but you did disaggregate the trust and hope by politics, and there were big differences in that. And that just kind of recalled, I don't know if you've looked at moral foundations theory at all, but you know, there's this idea that left-wingers and right-wingers have different moral principles. People on the left care about, I can never remember all five of them at once, people on the left care about kind of care and equality, and people on the right care about authority, sanctity, and loyalty, which never look like moral principles at all to me, but there we go. But I mean, yeah, it kind of seems interesting that you see those pronounced differences, and I wonder if it's related at all to that.
Yes, we did look at our emotional response vary across political groups, but I don't remember the result here. We also didn't want to insist that much about emotion because we wanted to try economic journal, and economists used not to like emotion that much, only when it was related to risk aversion and pure economic measures. But I'm saying that to the wrong audience because you guys are the perfect counterexample, and
Good ones.
and exactly, and so there is hope in this profession to have also some economists who are interested by all these concepts. And so once we get rejected by all economic journal and we start to submit to a political science and psychology journal, then we'll bring more emotion into the picture. But I haven't. But yeah, I think it's interesting to look at that, and your point about moral emotion is interesting. There are mixed feelings about this what you see. There's indeed a feeling of revenge when you see terror images and terrorists and so on. For instance, you may think, why disgust respond to climate shock as well? So disgust also, there's moral disgust. So you blame the government for not doing anything for these poor people who are a victim of flooding, etc. So there's the moral element also in that one. So yeah, I don't know exactly what we should do, because then we go in a full characterization of all the emotional picture, but that's interesting.
Have you tried to maybe, because the reviewer said that it's short-lived only, can you not look at sort of like German socioeconomic panel or understanding society and look at some sort of recent, terrorist attack and just, try to look at sort of real world, out of the lab replication?
That's a beautiful question, because that's exactly why we launched 5 years ago the HOPE project, which is a large program with 50 or 60 researchers in Bordeaux, economists, psychologists, and a few others. It started by a paper we had done exactly on what you're saying. So we had, and it's a paper we published in the European Economic Review that's never cited. It's extremely sad story, because all the papers that look at one event, like 9/11 and so on, our good friend Andrew Clark has, for instance, a paper on the Boston bombing. And all these papers looking at one event are heavily cited, and our stuff was looking at all the events, all the terror events over 30 years. We had the HPS and Understanding Society, where the GSOP, where the Swiss panel, we use all the panel that exist, looking at, so the outcome was the outcome was not trust, the outcome was subjective well-being, so life satisfaction, and political orientation, and showing if and it was an event study, but using all the events over 30 years with the global terror database. And I think it's it's a nice paper, but unfortunately, it didn't have much success. And the whole project started like this because the psychologists saw that, and say, oh, we're going to do lab experiments on what you did in the quasi-experiment, like in the event study approach. And what they did was exactly this. They started with some little video showing terror and so on, and see how people respond in terms of conservatism, trust, etc. They didn't look at hope. And what we do at the moment, we are using so we did these things separately, and we thought, okay, that would be great to put all these things together, and then lab experiment or this like online experiment are not the real world, because the video are not they're drawn from the real world, but they are not a real event that you experienced just yesterday. And in the quasi-experiment in our global terror database, we have people in GSUP or in BHPS and so on, who are interviewed just after 9/11 or just after the Bataclan, or and those who are just before, and then that's a nice quasi-experiment, and that's the real world. So it's not as causal maybe as the randomized experiment, but it's the real world. So for psychologists, it was very interesting to compare this, because they always live in virtual world, and they would like to confront their lab result to quasi-experimental evidence based on the real world. So at the moment, we are doing that for terror. We don't look at the climate shocks or war, but we focus on Germany mainly, and we might do the UK, and we look at all the terror events, and we try to compare that to what we've got in what I presented 5 minutes ago. But the outcome is, again, it's political orientation, so right-wing votes. Do you have a right shift in response to a terror event? So we actually didn't think we would have enough statistical power in our experiment to detect. We thought people might respond a lot in terms of trust and hope, but in terms of political like voting intention, we thought it would be much smaller, But right wing might be, I don't know, 30% of the vote, and you move to 30.2, so that would be too small to detect. But actually, we've got a right shift response in that experiment. And we compare it to the quasi-experiment, to the event study for terror events in Germany and the UK. So when the results are ready, I'm coming back.
That would be nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll come hopefully physically. I have the LSE pencil with me already.
All right. I think it's already past the hour. So I think if there are no more questions, then we are ending here. So thank you so much for coming. It was really lovely.
Thanks a lot. Hope to see you all soon.
Yeah. Okay. Have
Thanks
a lovely
so much.
rest of the year. Bye.
You too. All the best. Take care.